Imagine standing at the edge of a desert. Behind you, the most powerful empire on earth lies in ruins. 10 supernatural plagues just ripped it apart. An ocean split in half so you could walk through it. The army that chased you is floating face down in the water you just crossed on dry ground. You are free. For the first time in 400 years, your people are free. And the land God promised your ancestors, it is 11 days away. 11 days of walking. That is it. Less than 2 weeks, and every promise God ever made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob becomes yours. Instead, it takes 40 years. 40 years of sand, rock, heat, thirst, and death. An entire generation born and buried in that desert without ever touching the land they were walking toward. Out of roughly 600,000 men who left Egypt, only 2 made it in. 2. Everyone else died in the sand. Why? Why would the same God who just broke Egypt with his bare hands turn around and sentence his own people to 4 decades of wandering? Was he angry? Was he cruel? Was there a plan nobody could see? The answer to that question is one of the most uncomfortable truths in the entire Bible. And it has a lot more to do with your life than you probably want to admit. To understand what happened, we need to go back to Egypt, to the night everything changed, the night a lamb's blood rewrote the future of humanity. For over 400 years, the Israelites had been slaves. Not the kind of slavery you read about in textbooks and move on. The kind where you wake up every morning knowing that your body belongs to someone else. Where overseers whip you if you slow down. Where Pharaoh looks at your newborn son and orders him thrown into the Nile because your population is growing too fast. Generation after generation, century after century, nothing changed. The bricks got heavier, the whips got harder. And the promise God made to Abraham, that his descendants would become a great nation in a land of their own, must have sounded like a cruel joke to people whose grandparents had died making mud bricks under an Egyptian sun. But God had not forgotten. And when the time came, he chose the most unlikely man imaginable to deliver the message. Moses, 80 years old, a fugitive who had fled Egypt 40 years earlier after killing an Egyptian overseer in a fit of rage. He had been living as a shepherd in the middle of nowhere, married to a Midianite woman tending someone else's flock. His life was over, or so he thought. Then a bush caught fire on the side of a mountain, and it would not stop burning. And a voice from inside that fire said, "Go back to Egypt. Go to the man who wants you dead. Walk into his throne room and tell him to let my people go." Moses gave God every excuse in the book. "I am not a good speaker. Nobody will believe me. Send someone else." And God answered every excuse with the same response, "I will be with you. Now go." What followed was the most lopsided confrontation in ancient history. A stuttering 80-year-old shepherd versus the ruler of the known world. Moses walked into Pharaoh's court and said, "The God of Israel says, 'Let my people go.'" Pharaoh laughed. So God stopped asking. The Nile turned to blood. Every river, every stream, every puddle in Egypt went red. Fish died. The stench was unbearable. Pharaoh shrugged it off. Frogs poured out of the waterways. They were everywhere. In beds, in ovens, in kneading bowls, crawling across Pharaoh's own throne. He begged Moses to make it stop, promised to let the people go, and the moment the frogs died, he changed his mind. Then gnats, then swarms of flies so thick they darkened the sky, then a disease that wiped out Egyptian livestock while every Israelite animal stood perfectly healthy, then boils that erupted on the skin of every Egyptian, including the court magicians who had been trying to match God's power and finally gave up. Then hail mixed with fire that shattered everything in its path, flattened crops, killed anyone caught outside. Then locusts that devoured whatever the hail had missed, stripping the land bare. Then 3 days of darkness so absolute that the Egyptians could not see their own hands in front of their faces. 9 plagues. 9 demonstrations of power so overwhelming that the entire theology of Egypt was dismantled god by god. The Nile god, humiliated. The sun god, blacked out. The livestock gods, destroyed. Every deity Pharaoh trusted was publicly, systematically, and completely demolished. 9 chances, and 9 times Pharaoh hardened his heart. The 10th plague was different. This one was not a demonstration, it was a reckoning. God told every Israelite family to take a lamb without any defect, kill it at twilight, and paint its blood on the doorposts and the lintel of their house. That night, the angel of death would move through Egypt. Wherever the blood was found, the angel would pass over. Wherever it was missing, the firstborn son would die. From Pharaoh's palace to the poorest hut. No exceptions. The Israelites obeyed. They ate the lamb in haste, standing up, sandals already on their feet, staffs in their hands, dressed and ready to move the moment the call came. At midnight, a scream tore through all of Egypt. One unbroken wail of grief that stretched from the delta to the desert. Every household, every family, every Egyptian who had not covered their door with blood woke up to find their firstborn dead. Pharaoh's own son lay lifeless in the royal chambers. That same night, Pharaoh summoned Moses. No more negotiations, no more conditions. Go, he said, take your people, take your flocks, take everything, and get out. And after 430 years, roughly 2 million people walked out of Egypt in a single night. They carried gold and silver the Egyptians had pressed into their hands just to make them leave faster. They carried livestock, supplies, children on their shoulders, and for the first time in their entire existence, they carried something they had never felt before. Freedom. But here is what nobody talks about. Freedom was not the destination. Freedom was the starting line. And what happened next reveals something so deeply uncomfortable about human nature that it still makes people squirm 3,000 years later. It took Pharaoh less than a week to change his mind. He gathered 600 of his best chariots, the elite of his military, and launched them at full speed toward the fleeing Israelites. Now picture where the people were. Ahead of them, the Red Sea, a massive body of water with no bridge, no boats, no way across. Behind them, a dust cloud growing larger by the second, as the most advanced military force in the ancient world bore down on them with murder in its eyes. 2 million men, women, and children, trapped, no weapons, no training, no plan. And what came out of their mouths in that moment tells you everything you need to know about what was really wrong with this generation. Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you had to bring us out here to die? Did we not tell you to leave us alone? It would have been better to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Stop for a second and think about what they just said. Less than a week ago, they had watched God turn the Nile to blood. They had watched darkness swallow Egypt. They had watched the angel of death pass over their homes because of blood on a doorframe. They had seen a power so overwhelming that it brought the greatest empire on earth to its knees in a matter of weeks. And at the very first sign of trouble, all of it evaporated. Every plague, every miracle, every demonstration of God's absolute dominance over nature and nations, gone from their minds like a dream you forget before your feet hit the floor. This is the first time it happened. It will not be the last. And this cycle is the key to understanding everything that comes next. Moses did not argue with them. He said, "Stand still and watch what God is about to do." Then he lifted his staff over the water. God sent a violent east wind that howled all night long, and by morning, the sea had ripped itself in two, a wall of water on the right, towering above their heads, a wall of water on the left, and between them, a road of dry ground cutting straight through the middle of the ocean. 2 million people walked across the floor of the sea. Children, elderly, livestock, everything they owned. They crossed on ground that hours earlier had been buried under fathoms of churning water. The walls of water stood on either side like liquid mountains, held in place by nothing but the voice of God. When the Egyptian army charged in after them, God released the walls. The water came crashing down like 1,000 dams breaking at once. Chariots, horses, soldiers, commanders, every single one of them swallowed in seconds. Not one survived. On the far shore, silence. The kind of silence that only comes when your brain cannot process what your eyes just witnessed. The water was still churning where an entire army had just vanished. And then, the silence broke. Moses sang. Miriam grabbed a tambourine, and the women danced behind her on the wet sand. Children born in slavery were laughing. Old men who had spent their entire lives under the whip were weeping. Remember this moment, because what happens next only makes sense when you realize that these same people, the ones singing and dancing on the shore of a divided sea, would within days be begging to go back to Egypt. The speed at which human beings forget miracles is one of the most terrifying patterns in the entire Bible. And it has not changed in 3,000 years. That celebration lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days of walking through the desert of Shur, and they found no water. When they stumbled onto an oasis called Mara, the water was bitter, undrinkable, and like clockwork, the complaints erupted. 3 days after watching God drown an army for them, they were already asking, "Does God even care?" God showed Moses a piece of wood. He threw it into the water, and the water turned sweet. Crisis over, miracle delivered, problem solved. The lesson did not stick. Because 6 weeks after leaving Egypt, the complaints escalated to something that should make your jaw drop. "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. At least there we sat around pots of meat and ate all the bread we wanted. You brought us into this desert to starve us to death." Read that again slowly. They were longing for slavery. Not the concept of slavery, the actual experience, the whips, the forced labor, the drowned babies. They looked back at all of that and thought, at least we had dinner. And this is one of the most brutal truths buried in this story. Their bodies had left Egypt, but their minds were still in chains, still thinking like slaves, still measuring safety by the size of the meal, not by the faithfulness of the God walking beside them. You can take a slave out of Egypt in a single night, but taking Egypt out of a slave, that does not happen with one miracle. That does not happen with 10. That takes a wilderness. God responded anyway. Every morning, a white substance like frost appeared on the desert floor. They called it manna, which literally means, "What is this?" It tasted like wafers made with honey. And for 40 years, 6 mornings a week, it showed up, never late, never missing, never once. He also sent quail in the evening, fresh meat, delivered to their doorstep in the middle of a wasteland where nothing grows and nothing lives. But there was a rule. You could only collect enough manna for 1 day. Take extra, and by morning, it was full of worms and reeking. The only exception was the day before the Sabbath, when you could take double. Why that rule? Because God was not just filling stomachs. He was rewiring 400 years of slave programming. Every single morning, every Israelite had to make a choice. Do I trust that tomorrow the food will come again? Or do I hoard because I think God might forget? Some hoarded, and every single time they woke up to rot. This was never about food, it was about trust. And trust was the one thing this generation could not seem to learn. Then they arrived at Rephidim. No water. Again. And this time the complaints turned violent. The people were so furious they were ready to stone Moses. The man who had faced down Pharaoh, who had raised his staff over the Red Sea, was about to be murdered by the people he had rescued because they were thirsty. And the Hebrew text records their exact words, "Is the Lord among us or not?" After the plagues, after the sea, after the manna, after the quail, after all of it, they were still asking, is God even real? Moses names the place Massa and Meribah, testing and quarreling. And those names would echo through Israelite history as a permanent reminder of what faithlessness looks like. God told Moses to strike the rock with his staff, the same staff that struck the Nile. Water poured out and the people drank. Another crisis, another miracle, another lesson that would be forgotten by the next campsite. But before they reached Sinai, there was one more event that matters. The Amalekites attacked. It was Israel's first battle as a free people, and the way it unfolded reveals the deepest truth about how God operates. Moses sent Joshua, appearing for the first time as a military commander, to lead the fighters into battle. Meanwhile, Moses climbed to the top of a hill with the staff of God in his hand. And something bizarre happened. When Moses held his arms up, Israel won. When his arms dropped, Amalek won. Moses' arms got tired. He could not hold them up anymore. So Aaron and a man named Hur sat him on a rock and held up his arms, one on each side, until sunset, and Joshua won the battle. Victory was not just about the sword in the valley. It was about the raised hands on the hill, faith and action working together. When faith faltered, the battle turned. When faith was sustained, even by others holding you up, victory was certain. That lesson should have defined everything that followed. It did not last long enough. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites arrived at the base of Mount Sinai, and what happened there is the most important event in the entire Old Testament. God came down, not quietly, not gently. The mountain shook like the earth was tearing itself apart. Smoke billowed upward like a furnace the size of a city. Thunder cracked so hard it rattled bones. Lightning split the sky in jagged streaks. And a trumpet blast, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, grew louder and louder and louder until the people covered their ears and begged Moses to make it stop. In the middle of that raw, terrifying display of power, God spoke. But here is what everyone misses. He was not issuing orders to slaves. He was proposing a marriage, a covenant, 2 parties making promises to each other. You have seen what I did to Egypt and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now if you obey me and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession, a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. On eagle's wings, not in a jailer's chains, not under an overseer's whip, on eagle's wings. The image is a mother eagle carrying her young on her back, soaring above danger. God was telling a nation of former slaves, I am not your new master. I am your father, and I did not free you to control you. I freed you to love you. And the people responded with one voice, everything the Lord has said, we will do. A sacred vow, spoken at the foot of a burning mountain with the voice of God still ringing in the air. That vow lasted about 40 days. Moses climbed the mountain to receive the detailed terms of the covenant, the tablets of the law, the 10 commandments, written by the finger of God, instructions for the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary, where God would physically dwell among his people, an entire legal and social framework for a nation that had never governed itself. Everything a people who had been slaves for 4 centuries needed to learn how to be free. But down below, at the base of the mountain, the people got restless. 40 days of silence, no Moses, no updates, no visible sign that anything was happening up there except smoke and fire. And in their minds, silence meant abandonment. Because when you have been a slave your entire life, the absence of the authority figure does not feel like freedom. It feels like being forgotten. So they went to Aaron, Moses' brother, and said, make us gods who will go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us out of Egypt, we do not know what has happened to him. That sentence is blood-chilling. They are not just asking for an idol. They are erasing everything, reducing Moses to this fellow, deleting God from the story, and asking for exactly what they knew in Egypt, a visible, tangible, controllable God. A God made of metal, a God with no voice, no demands, no expectations, a God they could manage. Aaron, the man who should have stood firm, folded. He collected their gold earrings, melted them down, and shaped the metal into a calf. And the people looked at this thing they had built 5 minutes ago with their own jewelry and said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. Think about the insanity of that sentence. They are crediting their liberation to a statue that did not exist during the liberation. They watched God demolish Egypt with 10 plagues, split an ocean, rain bread from the sky, and they are pointing at a lump of gold and saying, this is who saved us. But it gets worse. The golden calf was not random. It was the god Apis, the sacred bull of Egypt, one of the most venerated deities in Egyptian religion. After 400 years of living in Egypt, Egyptian theology had soaked into their bones so deeply that the moment fear hit, they did not reach for the God of Abraham. They reached for the gods of their masters. You can take the people out of Egypt, but the Egypt in their hearts, that is the thing that takes 40 years to kill. And Aaron did not just build the statue, he built an altar in front of it and proclaimed a feast to the Lord. He blended the worship of the true God with a pagan ritual, syncretism. The most dangerous kind of idolatry, because it makes you believe you are still worshipping God when you have already replaced him. At least outright paganism is honest about what it is. Syncretism lies to your face while you bow. The next morning, the people rose early, offered sacrifices, sat down to eat and drink, and then the text says, they rose up to play. The Hebrew word used there, letzachek, carries implications that go far beyond simple amusement. Most scholars read it as a reference to pagan ritual behavior. The scene at the foot of Sinai had become indistinguishable from a temple party in Egypt. 40 days. That is all it took, 40 days of silence, and they replaced the God who shattered an empire with a statue made from earrings. God told Moses what was happening before he came down. Your people have corrupted themselves. They are a stiff-necked people. Let my anger burn against them and I will destroy them. Moses interceded. He threw himself between God's wrath and the people. He argued, he pleaded, he reminded God of the promise made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And God relented. But when Moses came down and saw the calf and the dancing with his own eyes, something broke inside him. He hurled the stone tablets to the ground and they shattered at the base of the mountain. The covenant, barely finished being written, already in pieces on the rocks where it was made. Moses burned the calf, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the people drink it. 3,000 men died that day. And yet, God did not walk away. He carved new tablets. He renewed the covenant. He told Moses to build the tabernacle. And when it was finished, the glory of God filled that tent so intensely that even Moses could not enter. A holy God choosing to live in a tent in the middle of a desert surrounded by people who had just betrayed him. That does not look like punishment. That looks like a love so stubborn it refuses to quit. The people resumed the march toward the promised land, and from Sinai it was still only days away. But what happened when they finally got there is the reason you are still watching this right now. It is the single moment where everything shattered. And it is the reason an entire generation never came home. They arrived at Kadesh, Barnea, the southern border of Canaan. The promised land was right there, just beyond the hills. They could practically smell it. God told Moses to send scouts, one from each tribe, 12 men tasked with exploring the land and bringing back a report. They were gone for 40 days. And when they returned, they carried evidence. A single cluster of grapes so enormous that 2 men had to carry it on a pole slung between their shoulders. Pomegranates, figs. Physical, tangible proof that the land was everything God had said it would be. It does flow with milk and honey, they confirmed. Here is its fruit. If the report had stopped there, this would be a very different story. The people would have crossed into Canaan, taken possession of the land, and the desert would be a footnote. A brief chapter in a triumphant narrative, but the report did not stop there. However, the people living there are powerful, the cities are fortified and enormous, and we saw the descendants of Anak, the Anakites, giants, men so tall that the spies said, and these are their exact words, we seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we must have looked the same to them, like grasshoppers. That sentence is not a military assessment. It is an identity statement. They are saying, we are insects. It does not matter that God parted an ocean for us. It does not matter that he demolished Egypt with 10 plagues. It does not matter that he has been feeding us from the sky every morning for over a year. We are grasshoppers. We are nothing. And if we see ourselves this way, surely they see us this way too. This is the slave mentality in its purest, most devastating form. 400 years of being told you are property does not disappear because you walked through a sea. It lives in the bones, it whispers in the dark. And when the giants show up, it screams louder than every miracle you have ever witnessed. 10 of the 12 spies delivered the same verdict. We cannot attack those people. They are stronger than we are. The land devours those who live in it. They did not just say it was difficult, they said it was impossible. They looked at what God had promised and told 2 million people it was a death trap. But 2 men saw the same giants, the same walls, the same fortified cities, and reached a completely different conclusion. Caleb silenced the crowd and said, "We should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." Joshua stood with him, and their logic was devastating in its simplicity. If God split the Red Sea, if God shattered Egypt, if God has been feeding us from the sky every morning, then what exactly are some tall men behind some walls going to do to stop him? Same facts, same giants, same walls, but completely different eyes. 10 spies looked at the giants and forgot about God. 2 spies looked at God and forgot about the giants. And the people had to choose who to believe. They chose the 10. What followed was the single lowest moment in the entire desert story. Not an enemy attack, not a natural disaster, something far worse. Self-inflicted destruction. The entire camp wept through the night. 2 million voices raised not in prayer, not in worship, but in raw, furious, ungrateful self-pity. And then they turned on Moses and Aaron and spoke the words that buried their generation. If only we had died in Egypt, or right here in this desert. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be taken as plunder. Would it not be better to go back to Egypt? And then the sentence that crossed every line. Let us choose a leader and go back. Go back to Egypt, to slavery, to the whips, the bricks, the drowned babies. They looked at freedom and said, "No, thank you. We would rather be owned." This was never about the giants. The giants were an excuse. This was about what they believed in the deepest part of their hearts. And what they believed was, God is not big enough. God will not come through. The chains we know are safer than the freedom we do not. Caleb and Joshua tore their clothes and made one final desperate plea. The Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of the people of the land. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. The crowd's response? They picked up stones to kill them. The only 2 men telling the truth were about to be murdered by the people they were trying to save. And at that exact moment, the glory of the Lord blazed from the tent of meeting in a light so fierce that every single Israelite saw it. God spoke to Moses, and what he said carries a weight that 3,000 years have not diminished. How long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I have performed among them? Not, why do they not obey me? Not, why do they not follow the rules? The question is deeper than behavior. It is about the heart. Why do they not believe? After everything I have done, after every miracle, every rescue, every morning of manna, why do they still not trust me? God was ready to destroy them, start over with Moses alone. But Moses threw himself between God's wrath and the people one more time. He pleaded, he argued, he reminded God of his own character, slow to anger, abounding in love, forgiving sin, and he begged for mercy. God pardoned them. But forgiveness and consequences are not the same thing. I have forgiven them as you asked, but not one of those who saw my glory and my signs in Egypt and in the wilderness, who tested me 10 times and refused to obey. Not one of them will see the land I swore to give their fathers. 10 times. God kept count. This was not a sudden burst of anger. It was the final entry in a long, patient record of chances given and wasted. Your bodies will fall in this wilderness. Every one of you 20 years old and older who grumbled against me. Not one of you will enter the land, except Caleb and Joshua. And then the detail that reveals the terrible precision of God's justice. As for your children, the ones you said would become plunder, I will bring them in. They will enjoy the land you rejected. The children they were so afraid for would inherit everything. The parents who were afraid would inherit nothing but graves. 40 days you explored the land. For each day you will suffer 1 year. 40 years you will wander in this wilderness until the last of your bodies has fallen. 40 days of fear, 40 years of consequence. The symmetry is perfect and merciless. The 10 scouts who brought the bad report died immediately, struck down by a plague right there at the camp. Only Joshua and Caleb survived, and here is the part that breaks something inside you. The people, when they heard the sentence, suddenly changed their minds. The very next morning they said, "We have sinned. We will go up and take the land." Moses warned them, "Do not go. God is not with you. You will be defeated." They went anyway, charging up the hill without the ark, without Moses, without God, and they were crushed. The Amalekites and Canaanites drove them back in total defeat. First, they refused to go when God said go. Then they insisted on going when God said stop. The problem was never courage or cowardice. The problem was that they could not bring themselves to listen, and so the 40 years began. But here is the part that most people miss entirely. God did not walk away. He sentenced them to die in the desert, and then he walked with them through every single day of it. The pillar of cloud never disappeared. It guided them through every scorching day. The pillar of fire never went out. It kept them warm through every freezing night. The manna never stopped falling. 6 mornings a week for 40 years, without a single miss. Their clothes did not wear out. Let that register. 2 million people walking through a desert for 4 decades, and their garments did not fray, their sandals did not fall apart, and their feet did not swell. That is not natural wear resistance. That is God quietly, faithfully sustaining people who would spit in his face every single day for 40 years. The desert was not just punishment, it was a school. And every day was a lesson. Some lessons were gentle. The manna, teaching daily trust. The Sabbath rest, teaching that God provides even when you stop working. The tabernacle at the center of the camp, teaching that God lives among his people even when they fail him. Some lessons were brutal. A Levite named Korah decided Moses had too much authority. He rallied Dathan and Abiram and 250 respected leaders and confronted Moses publicly. The whole community is holy, every one of them, and the Lord is with them. Why do you set yourselves above the Lord's assembly? It sounds almost democratic, almost reasonable, but they were not asking for equality. They were challenging an authority God himself had established. And Moses knew it. He said, "Tomorrow morning, God will show who belongs to him." The next morning, the ground beneath Korah, Dathan, and Abiram split open. The earth swallowed them alive. Their families, their tents, everything they owned, dropped into the ground and sealed shut above them. Fire consumed the 250 men who had offered unauthorized incense. You would think that would settle things permanently. But the very next day, the entire congregation accused Moses and Aaron of murder. "You have killed the Lord's people," they said. The day after the earth swallowed the rebels alive, the people blamed Moses. A plague broke out immediately. Aaron grabbed his censer and ran into the middle of the assembly. He stood literally between the living and the dead, making atonement, trying to stop the dying. 14,700 people died before it was over. Think about where we are in this story. The ground has opened and swallowed people alive. Fire has fallen from God's presence. A plague has killed thousands, and the people's response to all of it was to blame Moses. At some point you stop asking why did they keep rebelling and start asking a harder question. What was so broken inside them that no amount of evidence could fix it? That question is the entire point of the 40 years, and the answer was about to get even more uncomfortable. The grumbling about food returned. Not because they were hungry, They had food every morning. They were bored with it. "We remember the fish we ate in Egypt for free," they said. "The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, the garlic. But now we never see anything but this manna." They were comparing a daily miracle from heaven to a memory of Egyptian side dishes, and they decided the side dishes were better. They were so hungry for the flavors of slavery that they forgot slavery came with chains. God gave them what they asked for. He sent quail, so much quail it piled up 3 feet deep as far as a day's walk in every direction. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before they had even finished chewing, a devastating plague struck. The place was called Kibroth Hatava, the graves of craving, because they buried the people who loved what they left behind more than what God had placed in front of them. Craving what you had in Egypt will kill you faster than anything the desert throws at you. And that is not ancient history. That is a pattern you can watch play out in real time in anyone who keeps going back to the thing God already freed them from. The relationship they know is toxic. The habit they know is destroying them. The mindset they know is a cage. But it is familiar, and familiar feels safer than free. The desert was exposing this pattern one grave at a time, and nobody was exempt, not even Moses' own family. Miriam, Moses' sister, the same woman who had danced with a tambourine on the shores of the Red Sea. She and Aaron spoke against Moses because of his Cushite wife. "Has the Lord spoken only through Moses?" they said. "Has he not spoken through us as well?" God called all 3 of them to the tent of meeting. When the cloud lifted, Miriam's skin was white with leprosy. Aaron begged Moses. Moses begged God. And Miriam was healed, but only after 7 days of isolation outside the camp. Not even the prophet's family was exempt from the consequences of pride. Aaron died on Mount Hor. God told Moses to take Aaron up the mountain with his son Eleazar, remove Aaron's priestly garments, and put them on his son. Aaron died on the summit. When Moses and Eleazar came back down alone, the people understood. They mourned for 30 days. The man who had stood before Pharaoh, who had raised the staff over the Nile, who had built the golden calf, who had run between the living and the dead to stop a plague, was gone. The desert did not make exceptions. Not for prophets, not for priests, not for anyone. One by one, the landmarks of the Exodus were disappearing. The woman who danced at the Red Sea, gone. The man who raised the staff over the Nile, gone. The generation that walked through the ocean on dry ground was being slowly, silently erased from the earth. Every funeral was a monument to Kadesh Barnea. Every grave was proof that God means exactly what he says. And yet, even in the final stretch, the pattern refused to die. The people were complaining again. Same script, same ingratitude. "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to die in this desert? There is no bread, there is no water, and we detest this miserable food." God sent venomous snakes. They moved through the camp silently, biting whoever was in their path. People started dying, not a plague at a distance, fangs in the flesh, poison in the blood. Watching your neighbor collapse and knowing you might be next. The survivors ran to Moses. "We sinned. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away." And God gave Moses the strangest instruction of the entire 40-year journey. "Make a snake out of bronze and put it on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." No antidote, no medicine, no elaborate ritual. Just look up, look at the bronze serpent on the pole, and you will not die. It makes zero logical sense. Your rational mind screams, staring at a metal snake cannot cure a real snake bite, and that was exactly the point. This was not medicine. This was faith in its rawest form. Do you trust God enough to do the thing that makes no sense to your mind? Those who looked lived. Those who refused died. And 1,500 years later, Jesus sat across from a Pharisee named Nicodemus in the middle of the night and said something that unlocks this strange desert moment forever. "Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life. The bronze serpent was never just a field remedy, it was a preview, a shadow cast backward through time from a cross that had not been built yet. The venom of sin spreading through humanity, and the cure being the simplest, most impossible thing imaginable. Look up and live. Every rebellion in the desert, every plague, every act of mercy was pointing forward to something the Israelites could not see yet. 40 years of wandering. And the whole time God was writing a story whose final chapter would be written on a hill outside Jerusalem, where a man on a cross would say 3 words that changed everything. It is finished. But the desert still had lessons left to teach. And the next one revealed something the Israelites had never been able to see about themselves. While Israel was camped on the plains of Moab, the Moabite king Balak looked at the massive Israelite camp near his borders and panicked. He hired Balaam, a famous pagan diviner, to curse Israel. But every time Balaam opened his mouth to curse, a blessing came out instead. 3 times Balak positioned him on a different hilltop, hoping the view would change the words. 3 times, blessings poured out where curses were supposed to be. The pagan world looked at Israel and saw a people blessed beyond anything they could explain. The people who saw themselves as grasshoppers were seen by the outside world as invincible. The gap between who they thought they were and who they actually were was staggering. But Balaam found another way. If he could not curse Israel from outside, he would corrupt them from inside. Moabite women seduced Israelite men and pulled them into the worship of Baal Peor. A plague struck the camp. 24,000 people died. The lesson was devastating. The people could not be conquered by any external army. They could only be destroyed by their own choices. Every enemy that came against Israel from outside was defeated. Every single one. The only thing that ever brought this people to their knees was the enemy they carried inside their own hearts. And that pattern was about to claim its most devastating victim yet. The 40th year, Kadesh, the desert of Zin, no water. Again, same complaints, same words, same people with the same short memory. God's instruction was clear. Take the staff, gather the assembly, speak to the rock before their eyes, and it will pour out water. Speak, not strike, just speak. But Moses was done. 40 years of absorbing these people's rage, 40 years of complaints, accusations, and ingratitude. He stood in front of the congregation and let decades of exhaustion explode. Listen, you rebels, must we bring you water out of this rock? And he raised his staff and struck the rock. Twice, hard. Water gushed out, the people drank. The crisis passed. But God's words to Moses afterward must have cut deeper than any sword that has ever been forged. Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them. Moses, the man who faced Pharaoh, who climbed a mountain of fire, who spoke with God face to face, who carried a nation on his back for 4 decades, he would not cross the Jordan. 2 strikes on a rock, and the dream of a lifetime shattered. Why so severe? Because God had said speak. Speaking would have shown that God's word alone is sufficient, that his voice without force, without a staff, without human action, brings water from stone. Striking the rock implied that power was needed, and Moses' words, "Must we bring you water?" suggested that Moses was the source, not God. For a leader standing before a people who already struggled to trust God, that moment of anger did incalculable damage. If the greatest prophet in Israel's history does not trust God's word completely, what hope does anyone else have? The desert spared nobody, not the lowest slave, not the highest prophet. The rules applied to everyone, and the lesson was the same for all. What you do in the moments that test you determines the life you get to live. But while the old generation was dying, something was growing. Something easy to miss if you are only counting graves. Their children had been watching. A new generation, raised on manna and miracles, had grown up in the shadow of the pillar of cloud. They had watched the ground swallow Korah. They had witnessed the plague at Kibroth Hattaavah. They had buried their parents one by one and understood, in a way no sermon could ever teach, what happens when fear wins. They did not learn faith from a book. They learned it from gravestones. And when Moses, 120 years old, stood on the plains of Moab and delivered the speeches that make up the book of Deuteronomy, he was not talking to the generation that failed. He was talking to the generation that would finish the job. His tone was different. He was not putting out fires. He was casting a vision. And the burden of his message was one word: remember. Remember how the Lord your God led you through the wilderness these 40 years. He humbled you. He tested you. He let you go hungry and then fed you with manna, to teach you that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. Not by bread alone, a sentence that would travel through 15 centuries and land on the lips of Jesus himself, standing in his own desert, facing his own tempter. Moses hammered the point relentlessly. Be careful. When you have eaten and are full, when you have built fine houses and settled in, when your silver and gold pile up, do not let your heart grow proud, and forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. He knew. He could see the future with prophetic clarity. The greatest threat to the new generation would not be the Canaanites or the Philistines. It would be a full stomach, because in the desert, you depend on God for every bite. But in a land of abundance, the temptation is to say, my own strength did this, my own hands built this. The desert protects against the lie of self-sufficiency. Prosperity feeds that lie until it kills you. And then Moses spoke the words that would become the heartbeat of Jewish faith for 3,000 years. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. The Shema. Born on the plains of Moab, the last instruction of a man who would not cross the river. The summary of everything 40 years of desert had been designed to teach: hear God, love God, remember God. Every day, in every situation, no matter what. Then he blessed each tribe individually, just as Jacob had blessed his 12 sons centuries earlier on his deathbed. The circle closed. Jacob blessed the 12 in Egypt, sending a family towards slavery. Moses blessed the 12 at the border of Canaan, sending a nation toward freedom. And then Moses climbed Mount Nebo. God unrolled the entire promised land before his eyes. From Gilead to Dan, the forests of Naphtali, the plains of Ephraim and Manasseh, all of Judah stretching to the Mediterranean, the Negev in the south, and directly below, the lush, palm-lined valley of Jericho, spread out like a painting made just for him. This is the land I swore to give to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over. He could see it. He could see the green fields, the rivers, the hills. He could almost touch the trees, but he could not cross, and yet there is no record of Moses protesting, no bitterness, no argument. He accepted it. Because somewhere in 40 years of desert, Moses had learned the hardest lesson of all. Obedience is not a transaction. You do not obey God to earn the reward. You obey because He is God and you are not. Moses died on Mount Nebo, and the Bible says God Himself buried him. No monument, no shrine, no pilgrim's trail, just God and His servant, alone on a mountain, saying goodbye. No human has ever found the grave. The greatest leader Israel ever produced rests in a tomb that only God can visit. The people mourned for 30 days. And then Joshua took command. Joshua, one of the 2 scouts who, 40 years earlier, had looked at the same giants and said, "We can do this," who had spent 4 decades holding on to that conviction while every person who disagreed with him died in the sand around him. God's first words to him, "Be strong and courageous, do not be frightened and do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." He said it 3 times in one speech, as if God knew that stepping into Moses' shoes required a triple dose of divine reassurance. And then This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. Everything taught in the desert, every law, every lesson, every principle that seemed so abstract while they wandered among the dunes now had a concrete purpose: guide the conquest. Joshua sent 2 spies to Jericho, not 12 like before, 2, and those 2 spies found an unexpected ally inside the city, a woman named Rahab, and what Rahab told them should have been carved in stone and carried at the front of the Israelite army from that day forward. I know that the Lord has given you this land. Everyone in the country is terrified of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the Red Sea before you, and what you did to the 2 Amorite kings. When we heard it, our hearts melted, and everyone's courage failed. Do you hear what she is saying? The Canaanites were terrified of Israel. Those giants behind those massive walls, the ones that made 10 spies feel like grasshoppers, were shaking in their sandals the whole time. For 40 years, the enemy Israel was too afraid to face, had been too afraid to fight them. The fear that killed an entire generation was based on a lie. Under Joshua's command, the people approached the Jordan River. Flood season. The water was raging, swollen far beyond its banks. To human eyes, the worst possible timing. The priests walked in front, carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and the moment their sandals touched the edge of the water, the Jordan stopped. Not gradually, instantly. The current piled up in a wall miles upstream, and the riverbed went dry. 40 years earlier, the Red Sea had parted for their parents. Now the Jordan parted for them. Same God, same power, different people walking through. Joshua ordered 12 men to take 12 stones from the middle of the dry riverbed, 1 for each tribe. Those stones would sit on the bank as a memorial, so that when children asked, "What do these stones mean?" their parents could answer, "This is where God stopped a river. This is where the desert ended and the promise began." And then Jericho. God gave Joshua the most militarily absurd battle plan in recorded history. March around the city once a day for 6 days. On the 7th day, march around 7 times. The priests blow their trumpets, the people shout, and the walls fall. No battering rams, no siege towers, no conventional strategy of any kind. A plan that only works if God is exactly who he says he is. And Joshua obeyed. Without arguing, without questioning, without asking, "Are you sure?" On the 7th day, they circled the city 7 times. The trumpets blew, the people shouted, and those massive walls, the same walls that had made the old generation feel like insects, collapsed into rubble. The new generation had done what their parents could not. They trusted the word of God even when it made no sense, especially when it made no sense. They took city after city. They defeated armies and kings. The impossible enemies that had paralyzed the old generation fell in a matter of years. The entire land was conquered in roughly 7. The obstacles that had seemed insurmountable turned out to be exactly as beatable as Caleb and Joshua had said they were 40 years ago. The giants were real, but they were not bigger than God. They never had been. And then there is Caleb. If nothing else in this story moves you, this will. Caleb was 85 years old. He had waited 45 years for this moment. 45 years of watching his generation die while God kept him alive because of a promise. And when the conquered land was being divided among the tribes, Caleb did not ask for a gentle valley. He did not request a quiet stretch of farmland where he could retire in peace. He asked for the mountain, the specific mountain where the Anakite giants still lived. The same giants that had made 10 spies lose their courage and 2 million people lose their faith. "Give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day," he said to Joshua. "You heard then that the Anakites were there, and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helping me, I will drive them out just as he said." At 85 years old, Caleb climbed a mountain and drove out giants, not because he was physically dominant, because he had spent 45 years believing the same thing he believed on day 1, and not a single grave in the desert, had shaken his conviction. Faith does not expire. It does not weaken with age. It does not shrink because the wait was long. It just waits for the moment it is finally allowed to move. And when that moment comes, even an 85-year-old man can bring down giants. The day after the Israelites crossed the Jordan, they ate the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain, the food of Canaan. And the manna stopped. It did not fall the next morning. For 40 years it had appeared every single day, and now it was gone. The desert was over. But the lesson of the desert was never meant to end. 1400 years later, a rabbi from Nazareth taught his followers to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." Daily, like the manna. Not weekly, not yearly, daily. Every single day, an act of trust. And when that same rabbi was tempted in his own wilderness, he answered the tempter with the words Moses had spoken on the plains of Moab, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." The story of Israel in the desert is not just ancient history. It is the story of every human being who has ever stood at the edge of something God was offering and been too afraid to step forward. Because here is what the story makes painfully, undeniably clear. The real enemy was never on the other side of the Jordan. The walls of Jericho fell in a week. The Anakite giants were defeated in a handful of campaigns. The entire Promised Land was conquered in about 7 years. The impossible obstacles that terrified the old generation turned out to be paper walls. The real enemy was never outside. It was inside, a voice in their own hearts whispering, "You cannot do this. God will not show up. Go back to what is familiar. The chains are safer than the unknown." And that is the same voice you hear too. When the job falls through, when the relationship breaks, when the prayer goes unanswered for the 100th time, when everyone around you seems to be walking into their promised land while you are still eating manna in the middle of nowhere. But here is what that voice never tells you. The manna never stopped falling. The clothes never wore out. The fire never went dark. For 40 years, in a wasteland where nothing grows and nothing lives, God sustained 2 million people without missing a single day. You can leave Egypt in one night, but taking Egypt out of your heart? That takes a wilderness. It takes being hungry enough to learn who feeds you, thirsty enough to learn who sustains you, lost enough to learn who leads you. The desert does not destroy you. It reveals you. It shows you what you truly believe when the manna is all you have and the giants are all you can see. And if what you find inside yourself is fear, that is okay. That is what the desert is for. Not where you stay, where you change. And that is not a metaphor dressed up to sound spiritual. That is the literal architecture of this entire story. God did not waste a single day of those 40 years. Every sunrise was a lesson. Every grave was a warning. Every morning of manna was a question. Do you trust me today? And the people who finally answered yes were the ones who walked into the promise. The promised land was always there. It did not move. It did not disappear. What had to change was never the land. It was the people. And the change required time. It required the desert. It required the death of the old so the new could live. Because 11 days of walking could carry the body to the promised land. But only 40 years of desert could carry the heart. If this story moved something inside you, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this right now, share it with them. Sometimes a story finds you at exactly the moment you need it. I will see you in the next one.